definition because that doesn't help me. A mass, especially Catholic, to honor and...
The solitary girl had been sitting there for 3 days. She was only 6 years old, so thin that an oversized coat swallowed most of her, leaving only her tiny legs curled up on the concrete step. She sat beneath the awning of an abandoned laundromat on Portland's east side, her back against a metal shutter that had been pulled down long ago, both arms wrapped tightly around a torn teddy bear, as if it were the only thing left from the life she'd had before. The rain didn't stop. Every day, people walked past her. An old woman pushing a cart glanced over, then looked away. A young man in a hood moved faster, as if he was afraid of having to see. The convenience store clerk across the street tossed her a bottle of water and then shut the glass door again. Someone dialed the police, but no one came. Most people just kept going. They told themselves the same sentence, again and again. Her mom will come back. It's not my business. Someone else will help. There's always someone, and the little girl believed it. She believed with that stubborn faith only a 6-year-old can hold on to. Her mother said to wait, so she waited. Her mother said she'd come back. So she stared toward the end of the alley, watching for a familiar shadow to appear. Every time she heard footsteps, she lifted her head. Every time it wasn't her mother, she lowered it again. But she didn't leave, because her mother had promised. Portland rain felt like a curse, not violent, not loud, just steady, relentless, seeping into bone hour after hour. The oversized coat had been soaked since the first day, and now it was only a cold layer of fabric pressed tight against her skin. Her miniature shoes were torn at the toes, and her toes stuck out, bruised purple. The teddy bear smelled of damp and rain, but she wouldn't let go, because her mother had bought that bear for her, and she was holding on to everything she had left of her mother. Then came the night of the 3rd day, and a woman walked by. Her name was Elise Rowan, 27 years old. Thin, tired, brown hair wet and stuck to her forehead, an old coat pulled high at the collar. She'd just finished the night shift at an office for a transportation company on the edge of the city, the kind of company where people didn't ask too many questions about what was inside the cargo. She was walking back to her shabby studio apartment, moving fast, eyes down. Elise had learned early that not looking at anyone was the safest way. If you don't look, you don't see. If you don't see, you don't have to care. If you don't care, you don't get hurt. But that night, she saw. She passed the laundromat. The streetlight spilled under the awning, and in that dim pool of light, there was a small shape folded in on itself. Head dropped onto knees, shoulders shaking in waves. Elise took 2 more steps, then stopped. Not on purpose. Her feet stopped on their own, as if her body recognized something before her mind could catch up. She recognized that picture. Not because she'd seen it somewhere else, but because she had been that picture. 6 years old. The steps of an orphanage. A little backpack clutched to her chest, waiting for an adoptive family to come pick her up. They said they'd be there at 3 in the afternoon. 3, 4, 5. The sky went dark. The staff manager came out and dragged her inside, irritated, saying, "Get in. They're not coming." She didn't cry. She only sat on her bed, holding her backpack, and told herself, they must be busy. They'll come tomorrow, 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 until there was no tomorrow left. 21 years later, Elise stood in Portland rain, looking at a stranger child waiting on a step, and her whole life came crashing back in a single heartbeat. She turned around. She walked closer. She sat down beside the little girl under the awning, close enough to block a bit more of the rain, far enough not to scare her. Then she asked a question that, for 3 days, no one in this neighborhood had bothered to open their mouth and ask. "Who are you waiting for?" The little girl looked up, blue eyes, big, too serious for a 6-year-old face, clear like water, but tired in the way children shouldn't be tired. "My mom," she said, without hesitation. "She said she'll come back." Something inside Elise sank deep. She swallowed hard. How long has she been gone? The little girl tilted her head and thought. The man at the store over there said 3 days. 3 days. A 6-year-old. Alone. In the rain. And no one had stopped. Elise knew she should leave. She didn't have money. She didn't have power. She didn't have a home even for herself, let alone for anyone else. She was nobody. Just a shadow passing through this city each night without leaving a trace. But she looked at the tiny hands gripping the teddy bear, at the trembling shoulders, at the eyes that kept turning toward the end of the alley, waiting for a shadow that would never appear, and she couldn't walk away. Because Elise knew, down to the bone, what it felt like to wait for someone who was never coming back. And she knew what hurt more than the waiting, the moment you realize you waited for nothing. She took a deep breath, the kind people take when they know their life is about to turn in a different direction. "What's your name?" "Penny," the little girl said. "Penny Dawson. Penny, I'm Elise." Elise stood and held out her hand. "There's a diner at the end of the street. It's warm. There's food. From inside, you can still see this spot. If your mom comes back, you'll be the first to see her." Penny looked at Elise's hand, then back at the awning, then at the alley, then back at the hand again. "Do you promise?" "I promise." Penny placed her small hand in Elise's hand. Cold, so light it almost didn't feel real. And in the rainy Portland night, on the soaked sidewalk of the east side, a woman the whole world never noticed held the hand of a little girl the whole world kept passing by, and they walked toward the lights of the diner at the end of the street. Neither of them knew that one simple question, "Who are you waiting for?" had just changed 2 lives, and a third life too, the life of a man who had never believed he could belong anywhere. If this story touched you, please hit like to support the children who are waiting for someone to stop. Share this video, because the person who most needs to hear it might be on your friends list. And subscribe so you won't miss the next part, when the truth about Penny's mother is finally revealed. Penny ate slowly, one small spoonful, one small bite at a time, as if she was trying to remember how to swallow. Her blue eyes kept flicking down to the bowl of porridge and then up again, down and up, like she was afraid the bowl would disappear if she didn't keep watch. Elise sat across from her, both hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold, watching the child eat while a dull ache pulsed in her chest. Then Penny started eating faster, faster still. The spoon tapped against the bowl with a thin clatter. Porridge smeared at the corner of her mouth. She didn't wipe it. She didn't stop. She ate like someone was about to snatch the bowl away, like this meal would vanish too, the way her mother had. Elise reached across the table and touched Penny's wrist, gentle as a breath. "Slow down. No one's going to take it." Penny froze with the spoon in her hand. She looked at Elise, then she nodded, the smallest nod, and slowed again. But her eyes kept sliding toward the diner window, over and over. Every few seconds she turned her head toward the laundromat at the end of the street, the old awning blurred by rain. She was still waiting, even sitting here, even eating, even warm. Penny was waiting. "My mom used to buy porridge for me," Penny said suddenly, her voice quiet but clear. "She said porridge warms you up the best." Elise didn't ask questions right away. She only nodded, letting the silence make room. And Penny talked, in fragments, the way children do, jumping from one detail to another with no sense of order. Her mom's name was Shay. Her mom had blonde hair like Penny's. Her mom worked at the place, with green and red lights. Her mom left when it was dark and came home when it was light. Some days her mom came back with swollen eyes. Some days she didn't come back at all. Her mom used to hold her at night, hold her so tight Penny couldn't breathe. But Penny didn't say anything because she knew her mom was crying. "She said she was going to take me somewhere better," Penny said, turning the spoon handle slowly between her fingers. "She said there's a yard there, trees, and none of the men who come knocking at night." Elise listened to every sentence, and with each one, another piece fell into place. Green and red lights, night work, swollen eyes, men at the door. Penny's mother hadn't left because she wanted to. Penny's mother had been forced to leave her. And the words, "Wait for me," weren't a casual promise. They were the words of a mother who didn't know if she'd be able to come back, but still tried to tell her child to stay put so she could stay safe. Elise looked at Penny, and something tightened inside her. Not pity, deeper than pity. The recognition that this child hadn't merely been left behind. This child had been ripped out of the hands of the only person who loved her. Penny finished eating. She pushed the bowl away, obedient and quiet, and then sat still. Her gaze drifted back to the window again. The rain kept falling. The laundromat stayed dark. The alley stayed empty. Elise followed the direction of Penny's eyes and knew she couldn't put her back on that step, but she also knew she had nothing. No money, no home for 2 people, no power, no connections, no one in this world who would hear her say, "I want to help this child," and not sneer. She was nobody. Then she remembered the phone number. Not all at once. It rose slowly, like something that had been sunk at the bottom of her memory for a long time, and finally floated up. The first day she walked into the office of Jude Ashford's transportation company, 2 years ago. She was 25. No degree that mattered. No referral. Nothing but a thin resume and eyes that stayed lowered. Jude had handed her a small scrap of paper, a string of numbers written by hand. "My private number," he'd said. "Only use it if you truly need to. Not work. Need." She'd put the paper in a drawer. 2 years. 730 days. She'd never used it. She'd never needed it enough. Or she'd never believed she was allowed to need anything at all. But tonight, in a 24-hour diner glowing with pale yellow light, across from a 6-year-old who was waiting for a mother who might never come back, Elise picked up her phone. Her hand trembled, not from the cold, from the fact that she was doing something she never did. She was asking for help. She dialed. 1 digit at a time. Slow. Like she was afraid that once she finished, she wouldn't be able to undo it. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then someone answered. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of someone half asleep, dragged awake. The silence of someone listening, measuring, weighing why this number was calling at 2 a.m. after 2 years of never lighting up the screen once. Elise. Jude's voice, low, alert, not a question, just confirmation. "I need help," she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. But Jude heard what she couldn't hide, the thing she'd never let show in 2 years of working beside him. She was scared, not scared for herself, scared for someone else. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then Jude said, only 2 words. "Where are you?" Jude Ashford hung up at 2:07 in the morning. He was sitting in the penthouse on the 23rd floor, alone, like he was every night. The glass on the table was still half full. Portland's lights spread out below him like a dim woven carpet, and the room was so large that even his footsteps came back to him as an echo. Jude was 36 years old. He owned a piece of this city's underworld. People feared him. People listened to him. No one ever called him at 2 a.m. unless someone was dead or about to be. But Elise called, and she didn't call because of those things. She called because of a child. He set the drink down, stood up, and walked to the window to look out at the city. Somewhere out there, in the rain, the quietest accounting clerk he'd ever met was sitting with a 6-year-old in a 24-hour diner, and she had used the number she hadn't touched once in 2 years. Jude knew Elise, not the way a boss knows an employee. He knew her the way someone who'd lived in the dark recognizes another shadow. She didn't look at people. She didn't waste words. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't complain. For 2 years she arrived on time, finished the work, and left, as if she was trying to exist without taking up space that belonged to anyone else. And tonight she called, so he knew it mattered. 15 minutes later, Jude's car was already at the diner. He didn't come himself. He sent someone to pick them up. 2 men in black, polite, quiet, guided Elise and Penny into the car and drove across the city toward an apartment building in Nob Hill, where Jude owned 3 units that no one knew belonged to anyone. A safe place. Clean, warm, stocked, unmarked. The kind of place meant for people who needed to disappear for a while. Elise carried Penny inside. The little girl was half asleep, her head heavy on Elise's shoulder, her arms still wrapped around that torn teddy bear. Elise laid Penny down on the sofa, pulled a thin blanket over her, and sat beside her without taking her eyes away. She didn't know whether Jude would come. She only knew that tonight, Penny wouldn't sleep out in the rain. Close to 4 a.m, the door opened. Jude walked in, silent, as if he'd been born knowing how to move without making sound. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, no suit, no visible weapon. But the entire room changed when he crossed the threshold. The air felt heavier. The walls felt closer. Everything tightened around him, as if he were the center of gravity. Elise stood. They looked at each other. She didn't give a long explanation. She only said it plain. She's 6. She sat outside an abandoned laundromat for 3 days. Her mother left her there and didn't come back. I don't know where her mother is. Jude nodded. He didn't ask more. He didn't ask why Elise cared. He didn't ask what she planned to do. He only looked over Elise's shoulder toward the sofa, where Penny lay curled beneath the blanket. Then he walked closer. He stopped a few steps away and looked down. The little girl was so thin, the blanket was nearly flat, unable to even hold the shape of a body beneath it. Blonde hair tangled, matted, dirty. The small shoes with the torn toes sat on the floor, soaked through inside. The teddy bear was pressed to her chest, one eye missing, stuffing pushing out along the seam of its belly. Penny shifted in her sleep. Her eyes cracked open, cloudy, not fully awake. She saw Jude, a stranger, tall, dark, standing like a shadow made solid in a room she'd never seen before. Any child would have been afraid. But Penny wasn't. She only looked at him, blue eyes wide, not fully awake but awake enough to measure, as if she was weighing what kind of person he was, the kind who walks past or the kind who stops. Jude looked at the vulnerable child, and something happened. Not dramatic, not loud, just a moment where time slipped, and he wasn't in an apartment in Portland anymore. He was 7 years old, a Tuesday morning, a kitchen that smelled like old beer and cold cigarettes. His mother stood at the door with a bag in her hand, her eyes not on him. She opened the door, stepped out, and didn't turn back. No kiss, no warning, no, wait for me. She just went. Inside, his father smashed a bottle against the wall, glass shattering, then shouting, then a silence heavier than the breaking. Little Jude sat on the step outside, clutching something he couldn't remember now, only the memory of small hands holding tight, then letting go, and the hollow feeling that came with letting go, a hollow that stayed with him for 29 years. Under everything he built, everything he controlled, everything he owned, he'd never filled it. He'd only built over it. Jude came back to the present. Penny was still staring at him, more awake now, both hands locked around the teddy bear. She was shaking. Not with fear, with cold. The oversized coat she'd been wearing had been wet for hours, now stuck to her skin, no longer able to keep her warm. Jude didn't think. He pulled off his coat, black cashmere, the kind of coat worth more than all the clothes Penny had worn in 6 years put together, and he draped it gently over her shoulders. The fabric was warm, huge, almost swallowing her like a second blanket. Penny looked down at the coat, then up at Jude, and then she did something Jude wasn't ready for. She reached out and grabbed the sleeve of his shirt, just a small grip, with tiny fingers, ice cold, weak, but holding, not letting go. Jude went still. His whole body went still. He didn't pull away. He didn't step back. He didn't say anything. He simply stood there and let a 6-year-old hold onto his sleeve. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't know what came next. Elise stood a few steps away, her back against the wall, watching. She'd worked for Jude for 2 years. She'd seen him give orders without raising his voice. She'd seen people lower their heads when he walked into a room. She'd seen his eyes go cold as bulletproof glass while he read numbers. But she had never seen what was happening on his face now. It wasn't power. It wasn't cold. It was recognition, as if he was looking at this child and seeing something he'd buried deep for a long time, suddenly dug up by the smallest hands in the world. The next morning, Jude sat at the table in the safe apartment with a phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and fast, issuing orders in clipped sentences that Elise didn't catch in full but understood well enough. He was activating the network. Names, addresses, and districts were spoken like code. He was looking for Shay Dawson. Elise stood in the kitchen doorway, listening, waiting. When Jude ended the call, she spoke at once, with no detour. "I'm coming with you." Jude looked at her, not the way a boss looks at an employee, but the way someone weighs whether you understand what you're asking. "No," he said. "It's dangerous. I promised the little girl I'd find her mother." Elise held his gaze. "I don't make promises and then sit and wait." The words hung in the air. Jude didn't answer right away. He watched her, and Elise saw something shift in his eyes, small, almost invisible, but there. She had touched something he respected more than money, more than power, more than anything. "Keeping your word," he nodded once. They left while the sky was still gray. Penny stayed behind in the apartment with a woman Jude called in, a professional babysitter, tight-lipped, the kind who didn't ask unnecessary questions. Penny gripped Elise's sleeve as Elise prepared to walk out the door. "You'll come back, right?" Elise knelt to her level. "I'll come back. I promise." Penny let go, but her eyes followed Elise until the door closed. Jude's car cut across the city, through streets Elise had never traveled, toward neighborhoods the map named, but people didn't enter without a reason. The southern industrial zone, old warehouses, Back alleys behind rows of buildings where more than half the streetlights didn't work. Jude stopped in front of a bar with no sign. Only a steel door and the smell of cigarettes leaking through the seam. He got out, and Elise followed. Inside it was dark, thick with stale beer and damp. A few faces turned to look, then turned away the moment they recognized Jude. No one greeted him. No one asked questions. Silence simply drifted back and made room, like water moving around stone. Jude spoke with a man in the far corner, his voice low, his face hidden in shadow. Elise stood beside him, not hearing every word, but watching the way Jude moved through this world. Natural, cold, not forced, not performed. He belonged here the way a fish belongs in water. And for the first time, Elise saw it clearly, sharply, with nothing left uncertain. Jude Ashford wasn't a businessman with a few complicated connections. He ruled a slice of this city's darkness. She was standing in his world, and his world didn't have room for innocence. But she didn't turn back. The first lead became the second, then the third. A name here, an address there, someone who'd seen Shay in this neighborhood, someone else who remembered her working at that place. By afternoon, they stopped in front of a cheap motel in Southeast, the kind that charged by the week, with rotting wooden stairs and a hallway that smelled of urine and bargain bleach. Room 307. The door wasn't locked. Jude pushed it open and stepped inside. Elise followed, then stopped at the threshold. The room was small and filthy, paint peeling from the walls, curtains gray with grime, but on the bed, Penny's clothes were folded neatly, each piece, one by one, a small t-shirt with a butterfly on it, squared and tidy. Tiny jeans folded in half and placed beside it. White socks rolled into tight bundles, set nearby. Elise looked at those clothes and her throat tightened. This was the sign of a mother who believed she would come back. You don't fold your child's clothes if you know you're not returning. Shay Dawson had folded each shirt, each pair of pants, laid them on the bed, and walked out the door believing she would come back and carry them to her child. On the table sat a sheet of paper. Jude picked it up, read it, and handed it to Elise. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, rushed. My sweet girl, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I have to go. I'll come back for you. I promise. I'll find a way. I will. It stopped mid-sentence. The last word stretched into a slanted streak of ink, as if the hand writing it had been yanked away. And beneath that streak, the paper was crumpled and smeared. Tears. Shay had been writing to her child, and someone had dragged her away before she could finish. Elise set the letter down. Her hands were shaking. Not with fear, with anger, with the tremor that comes when you see a mother pulled away from her child in the middle of an apology. Jude didn't look at the letter a second time. He was looking at something else. In the trash bin beside the table, there was a wrinkled scrap of paper. He took it out and smoothed it flat, an IOU, and below it, a signature. Carlton Briggs. Jude went still. His jaw tightened, slow and certain, like steel clamping down on steel. He knew that name, not from rumor, directly. Carlton Briggs, 42 years old, controlled a human trafficking and drug pipeline in South Portland. Jude's direct rival, the kind of man with no lines, no principles, nothing he wasn't willing to sell or break. Jude folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. Then he turned to Elise. His eyes had changed. They were no longer the eyes of a man helping. They were the eyes of a man who had just found a target. I know him, Jude said. His voice was flat, but Elise heard what lay beneath that flatness. Deep, heavy, dangerous. And he knows me. Jude didn't go back to the safe apartment right away. On the drive, he kept calling, his voice low, fast, sharp. Each call shorter than the one before. He activated the entire network, from the people he paid to the people who owed him favors, from ears inside the police department to eyes at the docks. Find Shay Dawson. Find everything. Elise sat in the passenger seat in silence, the unfinished letter still tucked in her coat pocket. She could feel every word in it burning through the fabric, hot and heavy, as if that mother's pain had soaked through the paper and into Elise's skin. The answers came faster than Jude wanted. That night, seated at a makeshift work desk in the apartment, he opened message after message, report after report, scraps of information sent back from different sources. The truth revealed itself in pieces, not like a story being told, but like a wound having its bandages peeled back one layer at a time, each layer hurting more than the last. Shay Dawson, 24 years old, no family, No relatives. She'd come to Portland 3 years earlier with Penny, who was 3 at the time, running from an abusive relationship in Nevada. She found work in the red light district, the kind of work no one chooses if they have any other choice. But Shay didn't. She needed money. She needed a roof over Penny's head. So she accepted. And there, she met Carlton Briggs. Not met in the accidental sense. Carlton owned that district, owned the streets, the rooms, the girls working inside them. Shay became part of his list of assets without ever realizing when it happened. The first protection payment was small. Then it grew. Then it grew until it was more than Shay could ever repay, even if she worked for the rest of her life. That was how Carlton operated. Give a small debt, let it become a big one, then own the person. Shay understood too late that she wasn't free anymore. She was merchandise. And when merchandise tries to leave, Carlton doesn't allow it. Shay tried to run the first time. She took Penny in the middle of the night, caught a bus heading south, planning to make it to California. Carlton's men found her at a rest stop near the Oregon border and dragged her back. They didn't beat her. They only said, "Next time, I won't be that patient." Shay tried to run a second time. This time she was smarter. She didn't go far. She only changed neighborhoods, changed her name, found new work in the north of the city. 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, she believed she was free. Penny started at a new daycare. Shay started sleeping without jerking awake. Then Carlton appeared at her door, smiling. He didn't say anything. He only smiled. And Shay knew there was nowhere in this city he couldn't find her. The third time, Shay didn't try to run far. She tried to run for real. She bought a train ticket to Seattle, hid Penny inside her coat, and went to the station at 5 in the morning. But Carlton's men were already waiting. This time, he didn't smile. He separated the two of them. He locked Shay away somewhere she couldn't even describe to anyone, and he made it plain. Run again, and the little girl pays. Those 3 words killed every last piece of hope inside Shay. She didn't run anymore. She did everything Carlton told her to do. Obedient, silent, dying from the inside while still breathing on the outside. Until the day she asked Carlton for one thing, to see Penny one last time. She said she wouldn't run. She said she only wanted to look at her child. Carlton allowed it. Maybe because it amused him. Maybe because he wanted to watch what it looked like when she saw her daughter, and then had to walk away. Men like that like watching other people hurt. Shay brought Penny to the abandoned laundromat. She sat on the concrete step and held her daughter one last time. Penny didn't know it was the last time. Penny only knew her mother held her tight, tighter than usual, tight enough that the teddy bear was crushed between them. And Shay said, with a calmness so steady she could hardly believe she could sound that calm, "Wait for me here. I'll come back. I promise." Then she stood. She walked away. She didn't look back. Because if she looked back, she wouldn't be able to take another step. Shay didn't go straight back to Carlton. She went to a public phone at the corner of Morrison, dropped a coin in, and called the police. She wanted to report him. She wanted to tell everything. About Carlton, about the pipeline, about the other girls, about all of it. She wanted to trade her own life if it meant Penny would be safe. But Carlton knew. Carlton always knew. He had eyes everywhere. In the bar, on the street, even inside the police department. That night, on Morrison Bridge, Shay Dawson's body was found floating in the Willamette River. The water was black and cold. The rain was still falling. The police came, took photos, wrote notes. Their conclusion was suicide. No obvious signs of violence. No relatives came to claim her. No one asked about the 6-year-old child sitting and waiting outside an abandoned laundromat 15 minutes away by car. Shay Dawson died and the city didn't even flicker. Jude finished reading the final report. He set the paper down on the table. He placed both hands flat on the tabletop, his back straight, his eyes fixed on nothing. He stayed silent for a long time. Elise sat across from him and waited. She watched Jude's face and saw something she had never seen in him before. Not anger, not coldness, but the kind of silence that belongs to someone holding a storm inside through sheer will. Then he spoke. "I found her." His voice was stoic, but his eyes weren't. Elise didn't ask. Found what? She looked into his eyes, and she knew. She knew Shay wasn't coming back. She knew the unfinished letter would stay unfinished forever. And she knew that now she had to do the hardest thing she had ever done in her life. She had to tell a 6-year-old child that her mother kept her promise with her own life, and still couldn't come back. Elise didn't stand up right away. She stayed seated across from Jude for a little while longer, silent, as if she needed time for the truth to settle deep enough before she could carry it. Shay was dead. The mother who promised she would come back had kept that promise by risking everything to call the police, and she had died for it. The promise wasn't a lie, but the promise hadn't saved anyone either. Elise looked down at her hands. These hands would have to touch the shoulders of a 6-year-old and tell her that her mother was never coming back. She rose. Her legs felt heavy as lead. She crossed the short hallway into the next room where Penny was, stopped at the door, left slightly open, and looked in. Penny sat on the floor with her legs folded under her, crayons and white paper scattered around her. She was drawing. Her back was slightly hunched, her head tilted, her tongue sticking out a little at the corner of her mouth, so focused she didn't hear Elise's footsteps. She was drawing 2 people, one tall, with long blonde hair, one small, with short blonde hair. They stood side by side beneath a house with a triangular roof, and above them was a round yellow sun, its rays drawn in crooked straight lines bursting outward like fireworks. Beneath the picture, in shaky, messy handwriting, Penny had written 2 words, me and Mama. Elise stood in the doorway and felt something crack inside her chest. Not shatter, just crack, slow and deep, the kind of crack you don't hear but feel in every spreading line. She took a breath, opened the door, stepped in, and sat on the floor across from Penny. Penny looked up and smiled. She was still smiling. The smile was still whole, untouched, not yet aware of what was coming. Elise, I drew my mom, Penny said, holding the picture up. She's so pretty. She has long hair. I drew the sun because she said the new place will have sunshine. Elise looked at the drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands under a sunny roof. A 6-year-old's dream, drawn in wax and color on white paper. So beautiful it was cruel. Elise took Penny's hand. Small, warm, smeared with yellow and blue crayon. She held it gently, and Penny let her, still smiling, still not knowing. Penny, Elise said. Her voice was steadier than she expected, but every word had to be pushed out as if she were forcing it through a wall. Your mom loves you so much. She loves you more than anything. She left because she wanted to find a way to bring you somewhere better. She tried. She tried so many times. Penny tilted her head. The smile faded, not disappearing, just dimming, like a light being turned down. She didn't understand yet, but she felt something in Elise's voice, something heavy, something wrong, something that didn't belong here. But something happened, Elise went on, 1 word at a time. Slow, as if speaking fast would cut her. Your mom can't come back anymore. Silence. The kind of silence where you hear the clock, the rain outside the window, the quiet hum of the air conditioner. Everything becomes loud because the one sound you need isn't there. Penny's voice. She didn't speak. She only stared at Elise. Blue eyes wide, unblinking, as if her mind was running but hadn't reached the end yet, hadn't understood, hadn't touched the meaning of that sentence. Then she understood. It didn't strike like lightning. It rose like water, slow and cold, from her feet to her chest, to her throat, to her eyes. Penny said, very softly, her voice not shaking, just small. No, then smaller. But she promised. Her eyes stayed wide, but the rims reddened. Her lower lip began to tremble, then her chin, then her shoulders, and then her whole little body shook, as if something inside her was trying to hold, trying to block it, and couldn't, and it broke. The crying that came wasn't the cry of a child wanting candy, or crying from a scraped knee. It was the kind of cry no child should ever have to cry. Sharp, rough, tearing, as if something inside had been ripped out with bare hands. Penny didn't scream. She didn't wail. She only cried in bursts, one after another, each one heavier than the last, and the drawing slipped from her hands to the floor. The 2 stick figures lying on their backs, staring at the ceiling, the yellow sun still shining on the page while the fragile girl who drew it was falling apart. Elise didn't say anything. No words were enough. No sentence was right. She only pulled Penny into her arms and held her tight, both arms around her back, her chin resting on the top of Penny's head, and let her cry. Let her cry until the small body no longer had the strength to shake. In the doorway, Jude stood still with his back against the wall. His arms hung at his sides, but his hands were clenched, his knuckles gone white, his eyes were closed, not because he didn't want to look, but because he was looking at something else. Inside, Farther than this room, deeper than the present, he was seeing a 7-year-old boy sitting on a step, knowing his mother wouldn't come back, and there was no one to hold him, no one to say, "I'm here," no one to keep him together when he broke. That boy gathered himself up alone, patched himself alone, stood up alone, and grew into the man standing in this doorway, fists clenched, eyes shut, because the sound of the child's crying in the room was tearing open a wound he had spent 29 years building over. When the crying softened, when Penny was only hiccuping now, her face pressed into Elise's chest, her hands gripping Elise's shirt like a life preserver in the ocean, she lifted her head, eyes red, nose red, cheeks wet, and she asked, in the smallest voice a child can manage, so small it almost didn't sound human, but like the sound of raw fear itself, the sound of a child who suddenly knows she is completely, absolutely alone in the world. "Where do I go now?" Elise had no answer. She looked toward the doorway. Jude opened his eyes and looked back at her. No one spoke, but in that silence, between 3 people in that small room, something began to form that no one had named yet. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a commitment. It was only the understanding that this child could not be alone, and both adults in the room, each in their own way, knew exactly what that felt like. 2 days passed under a heavy silence. Penny didn't cry again after that night, but she didn't smile either. She sat on the sofa with the teddy bear in her arms, her eyes turned toward the window, but not looking at anything. Sometimes she asked Elise a question in a small, flat voice. Did it hurt for Mama, or was Mama cold? Elise answered each one gently, slowly, even though every question cut into her like a knife. Penny ate when she was told to eat. She drank when she was told to drink. But her eyes were different now. She no longer watched the end of the alley. She no longer waited. There was only an emptiness where faith used to live. On the morning of the 3rd day, there was a knock at the door. Not the knock of someone familiar. It was steady and firm, the kind of knock that comes with authority and paperwork. Elise opened the door. A woman stood outside, about 50 years old, gray hair twisted into a neat bun, a gray blazer, a brown leather folder tucked under her arm, light makeup, a wide smile, but her eyes didn't smile with it. Elise Rowan? Her voice was sweet and professional, the kind of voice trained through hundreds of meetings just like this. I'm Rita Cowell, with Child Protective Services. We received a report about a homeless child being kept at this address. Elise didn't invite her in, but Rita stepped over the threshold before Elise could say anything, the stride of someone used to entering anywhere without asking. Rita surveyed the apartment. Her gaze swept the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, recording every detail like a scanner. She opened the folder, pulled out a stack of papers, and began writing. Then she saw Penny. The little girl was on the sofa with her legs pulled up, the teddy bear pressed tight to her chest, eyes fixed on the stranger who had just walked into her home. Rita moved closer, her smile widening, her voice dropping half a tone into the voice adults use when they think children will like it. Hello there, I'm Rita. I'm here to help you. Rita reached out, intending to take Penny's hand. Penny flinched back, fast, like she'd been shocked. She yanked the teddy bear up to cover half her face, slid off the sofa, ran behind Elise, and grabbed Elise's shirt with both hands, pressing her face into Elise's back. She didn't say anything. She only hid, the reflex of a child who has lived long enough in an unsafe world to tell warmth from cold by instinct alone. And Penny's instinct said this woman was cold. Rita didn't show it. Her smile stayed in place. She drew her hand back, wrote something else in her file, and turned to Elise. What is your relationship to the child? I'm taking care of her. By whose decision? Mine. Rita kept writing. You're not family. You're not a legal guardian. Who is supporting you in keeping the child? Jude Ashford. Is that correct? The name fell out too easily, too quickly, as if Rita had known it before she ever came here. Elise didn't answer right away. She looked at Rita, and something in the woman made cold run through Elise's bones. Not because Rita threatened her, but because Elise recognized that look. She had seen it for 14 years inside the foster system, in the managers who counted heads for funding, in the foster families who took the money and locked her in a room, in the social workers who filled out forms perfectly and never asked one honest question. A measuring look, a calculating look, an inventory look, the look that sees children the way it sees commodities. Rita kept asking. More than necessary. How long Penny had been here. Who paid for the apartment. How many people came and went. How Jude Ashford was involved. The exact address. The daily schedule. Questions that didn't belong to someone trying to protect a child. Questions that belonged to someone trying to learn where the child was, who was holding her, and where the cracks were. Elise stood up, back straight, arms at her sides, but her hands tightened into fists. Behind her, Penny still hid, fingers clenched in Elise's shirt, face pressed into Elise's back, her whole small body pinned to Elise, as if Elise was the only wall between her and the outside world. And for the first time in 27 years, Elise Rowan decided she would be that wall. She's not going anywhere. Elise's voice shook, but her feet didn't move. Her eyes locked on Rita's eyes. Not lowered, not avoided, not asking permission. 27 years of keeping her head down. 27 years of avoiding eye contact. 27 years of making herself small so no one would notice. And tonight, with a child gripping her shirt, Elise stood tall. Rita gave a thin smile. The smile of someone used to being resisted, but certain the law is in her hand. You have no authority to keep the child, Miss Rowan. The law is very clear. A homeless child must enter the system. I can call the police right now. Go ahead. The voice didn't come from Elise. Jude stood at the end of the hallway with his back to the wall, arms folded across his chest. No one had heard him arrive. He moved like that, quiet, silent, and suddenly he was there, as if he'd been standing there the whole time. Go ahead and call the police, Jude said. His voice was low and slow, never rising. Then I'll call my lawyer. Then my lawyer will call Judge Williams, who I believe is handling this county's foster docket, and we'll see who finishes their phone call first. Rita looked at Jude. Her smile faded. Not fear. She wasn't afraid. She was calculating, weighing, adjusting the situation with a new variable. And she decided today wasn't the day to collide head-on. I'll be back, Rita said, her voice still sweet, but sweet in a different way, sweet with a blade inside it. She closed her folder, gave a polite nod, and walked out. But before she crossed the threshold, her eyes paused on Penny, longer than necessary, longer than a normal caseworker would look at a child, long enough for Elise to notice, and for the cold in Elise's chest to return, sharper than before. Rita walked down the building's stairs, out to the sidewalk. The rain was still falling. She didn't open an umbrella. She pulled out her phone, dialed, and raised it to her ear. She waited through 2 rings. Ashford has the girl, she said, her voice low and quick, no longer sweet. Shay Dawson's daughter. Yes, still alive. Nob Hill, a safe apartment, guarded. The accountant, Rowan, is holding her. Silence on the other end. Then a man's voice answered, slow and calm. The calm of someone who never needs to hurry because he believes he controls everything. Good. Let me see what game Ashford thinks he's playing. Rita ended the call, slipped the phone into her pocket, walked into the rain, and on the other end of the line, Carlton Briggs sat in a room and looked out a window and smiled. That night, after Rita left, the apartment sank into a quiet that wasn't truly quiet. Jude increased the guard outside the building, changed the door codes, and made 2 more short calls that Elise didn't ask about. She was busy with something else, putting Penny to bed. The little girl didn't resist, but she didn't help either. She let Elise change her clothes, let Elise tuck her in, let Elise pull the blanket up, let Elise draw the curtains, but her eyes stayed open, fixed on the ceiling, and she didn't say a word. The teddy bear lay tight against her chest. One hand held the bear's ear, and her thumb kept rubbing the worn patch of fabric. An old habit. A habit from nights when her mother went to work and Penny stayed home alone. Elise sat beside the bed with her back against the wall, her legs stretched out on the floor. She didn't leave. She didn't step out of the room. She stayed there until Penny's breathing lengthened, slowed, and those blue eyes finally closed. White sheets, a soft blanket, a pillow that smelled clean, a room that was warm and dry, no scent of rain, no drip of water from a torn awning. For the first time in many days, Penny lay in a real bed, in a real room, with a real person sitting beside her. And the little girl slept. Sleep came heavy and deep, pulling her down fast like a stone sinking. 3 a.m. A scream cut through the dark. Not a loud scream, but a hoarse, choked cry, strangled halfway in her throat, as if she was screaming inside a dream, and only half the sound could escape. Penny jerked upright, eyes open but seeing nothing, hands clawing at the air, reaching for someone who wasn't there. Mama. Her voice was rough, torn, panicked. Mama, mama, mama. Her small hands slapped at the blanket, the pillow, the empty air, searching for a familiar hand, a familiar scent of hair, a familiar warmth. Nothing. Mama. Elise was there before the third call finished breaking. She pulled Penny into her arms, both arms around her back, drawing her close against her chest. Penny fought, pushed, her hands still grabbing at the air, still searching, not fully awake, not understanding who was holding her. I'm here, Elise said. Her voice was low and steady, repeating like a rocking rhythm. You're safe. I'm here. I'm here. Penny stopped struggling. Her fingers found Elise's shirt and clutched it, clutching until the fabric wrinkled into tight folds inside her tiny fist, not letting go, as if letting go meant losing. Letting go meant sitting alone again on that concrete step in the rain. Letting go meant one more person walking away and not coming back. She hiccuped, wave after wave. Her face pressed into Elise's chest, tears soaking through the fabric, warm at first, then cold. And Elise held her, not letting go, not moving, because she knew this night. She had lived this night. 6 years old, St. Catherine Orphanage. A dorm room with 12 iron beds in 2 rows, white sheets that smelled like bleach, lights out at 9. The first night, she lay on her bed with her backpack in her arms, staring up at a strange ceiling, and she called for her mother. Not loud, only a whisper. Mom, Mom. No one came. She called again, a little louder. Still no one. The girl in the bed beside her turned over and mumbled, Shut up. No one's coming. She called a third time. The last time. Then she went quiet. Not because the sadness was gone, but because she understood calling was useless. So she stopped calling, then she stopped crying, then she stopped hoping, then she stopped believing, each thing fading out like the hallway lights at the orphanage after bedtime, until it was dark inside her, and she learned how to live in that dark without falling. 21 years. 21 years she never called anyone in the middle of the night, never reached for anyone in the dark, never held someone's shirt and refused to let go. But tonight, when Penny called for her mother, someone came. Elise was here, and she would not let this child stop calling the way Elise had stopped. Penny drifted back to sleep, her head on Elise's chest, her breathing moving from hiccups to steady, from steady to deep. Her hand still gripped Elise's shirt, not letting go even in sleep. Elise didn't dare move. She sat still with her back against the headboard, Penny curled in her arms, and she stared out the window. Portland rain fell softly outside, steady, familiar, cold, and she made a silent vow, not spoken aloud, only a thought forming clear as a knife carved into stone. You won't go through that. Down on the street in the dark, a black car was parked tight against the curb. Lights off. Engine off. Jude sat behind the wheel with the seat slightly reclined, eyes open, watching the 5th-floor window where a pale yellow light glowed through the curtain. He didn't go in. Not because he wasn't allowed, but because he didn't know how to be close to anyone at 3 a.m. He didn't know how to sit beside someone's bed and say, I'm here. He had never learned. No one had taught him. But he knew another way. He knew how to keep watch. He knew how to sit in the dark and make sure no one could touch that building without getting through him first. So he sat there, silent, all night long, until Portland's sky shifted from black to gray, from gray to a dull white, and the first light of a new day slipped through the heavy cloud cover. He was still there, because for the first time in a long time, there was someone inside that building he didn't want left unprotected. The next morning, Penny was still asleep. Elise gently eased the child's hand off her shirt, set the teddy bear into the place that hand had been gripping, and Penny hugged it without waking, her brows knitting for a moment, and then smoothing again. Elise stood, went to the kitchen, and poured herself a glass of water. Her hand still carried the sensation of those delicate fingers clenched all night, pressing through fabric into skin, like an invisible imprint she knew wouldn't fade. She was standing by the sink when she heard a voice, not from inside the apartment's main room, but from the room next door that Jude used as his contact point. The door was slightly ajar. It was a man's voice, not Jude's, one of his people, low and fast, the kind of voice trained to speak without being overheard. The southern shipment got stopped. 2 containers. Briggs's crew blocked it at the port. Boss needs to know so we can clean it up before Friday, or the other side will. Elise froze. The water glass was in her hand, her fingers tightening around it. She didn't move closer. She didn't need to. She had heard enough. Clean it up. 2 words. She had done Jude's books for 2 years. She had seen numbers that didn't balance. Income lines from transport, triple the usual during certain months. Vague expense entries marked maintenance fees, with no invoice attached. She knew. She had always known at some level. A blurry level. The level where she could close her eyes and tell herself she wasn't sure, that there might be another explanation, that it wasn't her business. But Clean It Up wasn't blurry. Clean It Up was sharp and clear, cutting straight through every layer of denial she had built around the truth for 2 years. She set the glass down and waited. The man left the room 10 minutes later, not looking at her, closing the door as he stepped into the hall. Elise waited longer, until Jude came into the kitchen alone, poured coffee, his back to her. She stepped in and closed the kitchen door. The click was soft, but Jude turned immediately on instinct, eyes sharp, shoulders slightly tense. Then he saw it was Elise, and his shoulders lowered a fraction. "I heard the call," Elise said. No detour, no preface. Her voice was flat, her eyes held his. Jude didn't speak. He set the coffee down on the counter and waited. "I'm not stupid, Jude." She used his name, not Mr. Ashford, not boss, the first time, and they both knew it. "For 2 years I've done your books. I've seen the numbers. I know they don't match. I told myself it wasn't my business, but now it is my business, because there's a 6-year-old sleeping in the next room, and I'm handing her to someone like you." She paused and drew a breath. "So I need to know. Am I wrong?" The question hung between them, heavy and full, with nowhere to hide. Jude looked at her, and Elise saw something she hadn't seen before. Not anger at being challenged, not the familiar coldness, but an honesty that hadn't been practiced, rough and awkward, like a man who had forgotten how to speak the truth because he hadn't spoken it in so long. "I'm not a good man, Elise." His voice was low, not defensive, not explaining, just stating it. "I've never claimed to be. I do things good men don't do. I control things good men don't touch. I live in a world good men don't enter." He stopped and looked down at his hands. Hands that had done what Elise didn't want the details of. "But I have lines. I don't touch kids. I don't traffic people. Those are 2 lines I don't cross. Not once. Not ever. And the child in the next room is inside the lines I protect." Silence. The faint hum of the air conditioner. Rain beyond the window. The sound of 2 people breathing, standing a single step apart, and yet farther than any distance. Elise didn't nod. She didn't say she understood. She didn't say she accepted it, because she didn't fully accept it. She couldn't. She was a woman raised inside a system where powerful men created orphans. She knew power like Jude's, even with boundaries, still left victims behind. But she also looked at him and saw it. He had stopped. He had taken his coat off for the child. He had sat in a car all night to keep watch. He hadn't walked past. In this world, there were no perfect choices, only choices that were less bad, and Elise, who had lived 27 years with nothing but bad choices, knew that better than anyone. "If those lines move," she said, her voice steady, each word precise like a ruler, "even one step, even once, I'll take her and I'll be gone, and you won't find us." Jude looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something in his eyes she didn't expect. Respect. Not the kind given to the weak out of pity, but the kind given to someone dangerous. Elise Rowan, the quiet accountant, thin, head down, the woman he'd mistaken for a shadow for 2 years, had just looked an underworld kingpin in the eye and said she would take this child out of his hands if he crossed the line. And he believed she would. "Fair," Jude said. 1 word. He nodded. The air stayed heavy, tense. The kind of tension they both knew wouldn't vanish in a day, would take time, would take more than one conversation. But at least the truth had been spoken, unsoftened, undenied, and they were both still standing here. Then the kitchen door opened. Penny stood in the doorway with her hair messy, her eyes still swollen from the night before. The teddy bear tucked under one arm, her hands still stained with yesterday's crayon wax she hadn't washed off. She looked at Elise, looked at Jude, looked at the 2 of them standing in the kitchen with an atmosphere she didn't understand but could feel. The way children always feel it, with a sense adults have lost. "Breakfast," Penny said. Not a question. A statement. Her voice was small but clear, the voice of a child trying to make a new day normal when nothing was normal anymore. "I'm hungry." She took Elise's hand with her left hand. Then she turned and took hold of Jude's sleeve with her right. She tugged, both of them, toward the table. Penny didn't know anything about the early morning phone call, about cleaning things up, about lines and polite threats between adults. She only knew one thing: these two people were here. And right now, here was enough. After breakfast, Elise and Jude didn't speak again. The words from the morning still hung in the air, not gone, not settled. Like cigarette smoke that clings to curtains, Jude retreated to the outer room, made calls, handled business, his voice low, short, even, as if the confrontation with Elise had never happened. Elise stayed in the bedroom with Penny and read to her from a thin book she found on the apartment shelf, a cookbook. Not a children's story, but Penny didn't care about the content. She only wanted to hear Elise's voice, steady and close and warm, like a thread keeping her from drifting away. All day, the spaces stayed separated. The inner room, the outer room, Elise, Jude. No one went looking for the other. No one needed to. The distance after that morning's conversation wasn't cold. It was simply an emptiness they both needed in order to digest what had been said. Until afternoon, Penny sat on the floor with crayons and white paper spread around her like a small kingdom. She drew. This time it wasn't two people. It was three. The first stick figure was the smallest, blonde hair, holding a teddy bear. The second was taller, brown hair, standing on the left. The third was the tallest, black hair, standing on the right. Three people, holding hands beneath a triangular roof, a yellow sun in the corner. When Penny finished, she studied it, then stood up, with the page in her hands, and ran into the outer room. Elise followed and stopped in the doorway to watch. Penny ran straight to where Jude was sitting, tugged his sleeve, and held the drawing up, her eyes bright for the first time in days. "Look, you're the tallest." Jude looked down at the drawing. 3 stick figures, hands linked, a roof, a sun. Penny pointed to each one. "This is me. This is Elise. This is you. I made you the tallest, because you really are the tallest." Jude didn't say anything at first. He stared at the page longer than a crayon drawing by a 6-year-old needed to be stared at, because he wasn't looking at the drawing. He was looking at what lived inside it, what Penny didn't know she had drawn. A family, 3 people, hands held, under a roof, with sunlight, the thing Jude Ashford had never had, never belonged to, never imagined could appear in any picture of his life. He took the paper, gently, with both hands, as if it might break. "Thank you," he said. 2 words. His voice sounded ordinary, but Elise, standing in the doorway, saw it. He didn't hand the drawing back. He folded it carefully and slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat, the place closest to his chest. Penny smiled, ran back to the floor, and went on drawing, not knowing that a 10-minute crayon picture had cracked a wall concrete and steel couldn't break. The afternoon passed. Evening came. Penny ate, bathed, and fell asleep. Easier this time. Teddy bear in her arms, eyes closing before Elise could even pull the blanket up. Elise stepped out onto the balcony. 5th floor. A small balcony, overlooking a rain-soaked street under dull yellow streetlights. She leaned on the railing and tilted her face up, letting mist touch her skin, cold and light and familiar. She heard footsteps behind her but didn't turn. She knew it was Jude. He didn't step onto the balcony. He stood in the doorway, back against the frame, arms folded, half in and half out. The distance was still there, but thinner than it had been that morning, thin enough for words to pass through. They didn't speak for a while. The rain spoke instead. Then Jude said it, not looking at Elise, looking out at the street. "My mother left on a Tuesday morning. I was 7. His voice was composed and clipped, like he was reading a newsline about someone else's life. "She left nothing. No letter, no photo, no reason. To this day I don't know why. Maybe there wasn't a why." A brief silence. My father drank. He hit. Not the kind of hit that's a slap. The kind that puts you in the hospital. Until I was 12, old enough to hit back, or small enough to disappear. I chose to disappear. He kept talking, without Elise asking, as if something had opened and the words were pouring out on their own. "I slept under Morrison Bridge, the same bridge where..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They both knew which bridge Shay Dawson had been found beneath. "I ate leftovers behind restaurants. I stole when I had to. I fought when I was forced. No one ever stopped for me. Not one person. So I built something big enough that no one could walk past me without looking. Silence again. Rain falling. Jude didn't add a conclusion. He didn't have to. He had spoken more in the last 5 minutes than he had in the 2 years Elise had worked for him. Elise stared out at the city, the dim lights, the wet street, the patient drizzle. And then she spoke, softly, not looking at Jude, as if she was talking to Portland more than to him. 4 foster families. All 4 sent me back. She paused. The first kept me for 6 weeks. They wanted a daughter, but I didn't smile enough, so they changed their minds. The second, 3 months. The third, 4 weeks, the shortest. They moved and didn't take me with them, like they forgot a piece of furniture. She gave a small laugh with no joy in it. The last one kept me 3 months, the longest. I was 9. I tried so hard. I tried to be good. I tried to be quiet. I tried to take up as little space as possible. Then they said I was too quiet, too distant. They told the caseworker I couldn't connect. She looked down at her hands on the railing, wet with rain, cold. I was 9. I was only trying not to bother anyone, so they wouldn't leave. Turns out that was exactly why they left. Silence. Long. Rain. 2 people stood there, one inside and one outside, not looking at each other and not needing to. They didn't need faces to know what the other looked like right now. They knew, because they carried the same wound. Not the same shape. Jude built an empire, and Elise built silence, but the same root. They were both children who had been left behind. One built a wall out of power so no one would dare walk away. One built a wall out of invisibility so no one would need to walk away because no one knew she was there. 2 walls. 2 kinds of loneliness. And Penny, the 6-year-old sleeping in the next room with a drawing of 3 people holding hands, was the only reason either of them had to look at their own wall. And for the first time, they didn't turn away. Early the next morning, Elise opened the apartment door to pick up the bag of groceries Jude's people left outside every day. But today, beside the groceries, there was an envelope. Brown. No sender name, no postmark, no stamp. Someone had placed it here by hand, right outside the door of a safe apartment whose address no one was supposed to know. Elise picked up the envelope. Light, thin. Inside were only 2 things. The first was a photograph. Elise slid it out, looked, and the blood in her body turned to ice. Penny, sitting in front of the abandoned laundromat, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around the teddy bear, back against the metal shutter. Rain falling. The angle was slightly tilted, taken from far away. Clearly a secret shot through a car window, or from across the street. But it wasn't a recent photo. Elise looked closer, and realized the oversized coat on Penny in the picture was still dry. The awning wasn't soaked yet. The rain had only just begun. This photo had been taken on the first day, before Elise ever found Penny, before even the second day or the third. Someone had stood there, watched a 6-year-old sitting alone in front of an abandoned laundromat, lifted a camera, took the picture, and walked away, knowing she was there, doing nothing, letting her sit, letting her wait, letting her go hungry and cold and alone, like bait. The second thing in the envelope was a scrap of paper, handwritten. The letters were neat and confident, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone used to giving orders more than used to writing. Return my property. 4 words. Elise read them and understood immediately. Penny wasn't a child in Carlton Briggs's eyes. Penny was an asset, a thing, something that belonged to him because her mother belonged to him, and when someone takes what belongs to him, he demands it back. Elise's hands began to shake, not a small tremor, a shaking that started inside, from a place deeper than muscle and deeper than bone, the place where memory lives. She knew this feeling. She had lived with it through her whole childhood, the feeling of danger moving closer, the feeling that she had to run. 4 foster families, 4 times being sent back, and every time, before she was sent back, there were signs. The air changed, the voices changed, the eyes changed, and Elise learned this. When the air changes, run before it hurts, disappear before you're abandoned. Don't wait until they say, you have to go, because by then it's too late. She stepped into the room. Her hands opened the closet on their own. She grabbed a bag. She stuffed Penny's clothes inside, stuffed a spare teddy bear, stuffed a coat, Her hands were shaking but fast, practiced, as if her body had rehearsed this motion hundreds of times. Pack, run, disappear. It was the only thing Elise knew how to do when she was afraid. Not face it, not fight back. Run, run, run. Her heart hammered. Her eyes darted. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She only reacted. 27 years of reaction. She shoved in another shirt, pulled the zipper, turned, and stopped. Penny was standing in the doorway. Hair mussed, eyes sleepy, teddy bear tucked under one arm. She looked at Elise, looked at the bag, looked at the hurried pile of clothes, and her eyes changed. Not fear like a child afraid of the dark or thunder, but the fear of a child who has lost her mother and recognizes the next person is about to leave too. "Where are you going?" Her voice was small. She didn't cry. She only asked. But the question weighed more than any scream. Elise looked at the little girl, at those blue eyes fixed on her, wide and awake and bright and terrified. Not terrified of Carlton, not terrified of danger, terrified of Elise walking away, terrified of being alone again, terrified of waiting again. Elise looked down at the bag in her hand, then back at Penny, and she saw herself, 6 years old, standing at the door of an orphanage room, watching a social worker pack her things into a black plastic bag, knowing she was being moved again, and no one asked if she wanted it. No one stopped. Elise set the bag down, slowly, on the floor beside her feet, as if she was setting down an old habit, an old reflex, an old way of living. She knelt until her eyes were level with Penny's. "I'm not going anywhere." Elise's voice trembled. Her eyes didn't. Penny looked at Elise, looked at the bag on the floor, looked back at Elise, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Elise's neck, pressing her face into Elise's shoulder, gripping Elise's shirt in the familiar place where the fabric had been wrinkled by too many nights. She didn't say anything. She only held on, and Elise held her back, tight, holding this child and holding the 6-year-old child inside herself too. The child who had never had anyone kneel down and say, "I'm not going anywhere." She wasn't going to run anymore. 10 minutes later, Jude arrived. Elise handed him the envelope. He pulled out the photograph, looked at it, his face unchanged but his jaw tightening. Then he read the note. 4 words. "Return my property." He folded the paper, slipped it into his pocket, and stood still for a moment. His eyes weren't on the photo anymore. His eyes were calculating, tracing backward. This was a safe apartment, unlisted, no name. No one knew the address except his people. Elise hadn't told anyone. Jude hadn't told anyone. The babysitter was trusted. So who? Who knew Penny was here? Who knew enough details? The address, the floor, the unit. Who was holding her? Who was protecting her? Then he remembered. Rita Cowell. She had been here 2 days earlier. She had asked all those questions. The address, the floor, who was keeping the child, whether Jude Ashford was involved. She had written it all down, and she had walked out with all that information inside that brown leather folder. Only one person outside Jude's circle knew enough to get an envelope to this exact door. "Rita." "Pack," Jude said, his voice no longer flat, edged now, with a knife inside it. "We're leaving. Right now." An hour later, Jude's car drove out of the city, through suburban roads Elise had never seen. The rain was still falling, but lighter now, as if Portland was letting go as they moved farther from downtown. The car stopped in front of a house. Small, 1 story, white paint, a little worn but clean, a small front yard with grass dark and wet from rain, a low white fence, more decoration than barrier, a maple tree at the corner of the yard, its leaves turning yellow. Penny peered out the car window. "Whose house is that?" Jude turned off the engine and stared at the house through the windshield. He had bought it years ago with cash through 3 layers of shell companies, leaving no trace. He didn't know why he bought it. The white fence, the small yard, the maple tree, the kind of house ordinary children grow up in, the kind of house he never had. He bought it, locked the door, and left it, never coming back, like holding on to a thought he didn't dare finish. Until today. "Ours," he said. Then he opened the car door, stepped out, and for the first time, walked into the house he had bought for a life he never believed he could have. 3 days in the house with the white fence passed in a quiet so gentle it almost felt normal. Penny explored the small yard, ran circles around the maple tree, found a snail on a leaf, and named it Buddy. Elise cooked instant noodles in the tiny kitchen. burned them once, left them undercooked once, and on the third try got them just edible. And Penny said, "Good job," in the serious voice of a child trying to make an adult feel better. Jude came every evening, checked the perimeter, walked the house, looked out the windows, made a short call or two, then sat on the front porch drinking black coffee by himself until the sky went fully dark. Everything was almost fine. Almost. On the fourth day, Elise needed to buy things for Penny. Milk, bread, crayons, because Penny had used up the old ones and was drawing with a pencil now, complaining she didn't have yellow for the sun. The small grocery store was a 7-minute walk away at the end of a quiet street in a calm neighborhood. Elise told Penny to stay home with the sitter and promised she'd be back in 15 minutes. Penny looked at her with a flicker of worry, then nodded. Just 15 minutes. Just 15. Elise walked to the store, bought what she needed, carried the bag out, and as she turned onto the narrow road leading back to the house, a black car slid tight to the curb. Fast. Silent. A door opened. 2 men stepped out, one to her left and one to her right, blocking the way. Elise didn't even have time to turn before a hand seized her collar and another hand clamped over her mouth. The groceries hit the sidewalk. Milk spilled. The box of crayons burst open. Sticks of wax rolling across the wet road. She was dragged into the car. The door slammed. The car moved. All of it in less than 10 seconds. When the blindfold was pulled off, Elise didn't know how much time had passed. 10 minutes. 20. She couldn't tell because the stench of engine oil was so strong it made her head spin. A warehouse. Gray concrete. A high ceiling with steel beams, and a flickering neon light hanging from loose wiring. The smell of oil, rust, damp, cold. The kind of cold that sinks into bone. Not from weather, but from the space itself. The cold of a place no one goes if they have a choice. Elise sat on a metal chair. Her hands weren't tied, but 2 men stood behind her close enough to make it clear that freedom of movement was only an illusion. 3 steps in front of her, a man sat on a wooden chair with his legs crossed, hands resting on his thighs, relaxed, like he was in a coffee shop on a Sunday morning. Carlton Briggs, 42 years old, narrow gray eyes that measured everything by usefulness. A smiling mouth, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. It stayed on his lips, and only on his lips, like jewelry worn for show with no meaning beneath it. Hair slicked back. A gray suit. Clean shoes. Clean in a way that looked out of place in an industrial warehouse, as if he wanted Elise to understand that he was here by choice, not because he had to be. Miss Rowan. His voice was mild and polite, the politeness of someone who knows he's holding the knife while the other person isn't. "I think we should talk." Elise said nothing. She sat still and looked at him, assessing. Her heart raced, but she forced it to slow, forced it by sheer will, because she knew Carlton was reading her. He read Shay. He knew Shay would cry, would beg, would break, and he had been right. Now he was reading Elise, waiting to see what type she was. "I'll be direct," Carlton said. "The girl is mine. Her mother owed me. Her mother's dead, so the debt transfers to the child. That's the rule. Ashford knows the rule. You might not, so I'm explaining it to you." He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked straight into Elise's face. "Hand her over. Go home. Forget this. Or," he shrugged lightly, as if he were talking about the weather, "disappear. Permanently, like Shay." He paused. He waited. For tears, for pleading, for Elise to collapse, the way everyone else did in front of him. But Elise didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't shake. Or if she did, it was inside, where Carlton couldn't see. She sat upright on the cold metal chair, with her hands resting on her knees, and met his eyes. Because Elise had been afraid her entire life. 27 years of fear. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of being returned. Fear of being forgotten. Fear so constant she had built her whole life around it. Shrinking. Disappearing. Don't take up space. Don't draw attention. Fear wasn't new to her. It wasn't something Carlton could use like a weapon, because she had lived inside it longer than he could imagine. And inside that familiar fear, she saw something sharper than fear. Penny's face. Blue eyes. Penny's voice asking, "Where are you going that morning?" Penny's voice saying, "Just 15 minutes." Elise had promised 15 minutes, and she would not let that promise become unfinished. Like Shay's letter that stopped in the middle on a motel table. "You killed her mother," Elise said. Her voice was flat. No shouting, no dramatics. Just truth, word by word, clear as a statement being read into the record. You left that little girl sitting for 3 days in the rain. Alone. 6 years old. You knew she was there. You took a picture, and you stood there and watched. You did nothing. She paused and held Carlton's narrow gray gaze. Do you think I'm more afraid of you than I'm afraid of that happening again? Carlton blinked. Fast. Almost nothing. But Elise saw it. For the first time, he couldn't read the person in front of him. He expected tears and got stone. He expected collapse and got eye contact. The quiet, thin accountant with her head down, the one he thought would be easiest, wasn't easy at all. The silence stretched. Carlton leaned back again, legs still crossed, but the smile faded by a fraction. He was recalculating. You're brave, he said, still mild, but edged now. Shay was brave too. Did you see what bravery did for her? Shay was alone, Elise said. I'm not. Carlton tilted his head. Ashford. You think Ashford will trade his empire for you? For an accountant? Elise didn't answer that. Instead, she did something else. During the whole conversation, her right hand had been resting on her knee, still, but her left hand, hidden from Carlton by the angle of the chair, had been moving. Slowly, centimeter by centimeter, fingers sliding into her coat pocket where her phone was. She didn't look down. She didn't change her expression. Her thumb found the power button, pressed and held, felt the small vibration as the screen came alive. Swipe. Unlocked. She couldn't see it, but she remembered. Jude's number was the last call, sitting at the top. 2 taps. Call. She felt the faint buzz in her pocket as the connection went through. Jude was listening. Now she needed him to hear exactly what he needed. You know, Elise said, her voice a little louder now, more casual, as if this was an ordinary conversation. This feels close to the bridge, doesn't it? I can smell the river, and the oil is so heavy, like an industrial warehouse on the south side, near the old docks. Carlton lifted an eyebrow. What are you doing? Talking, Elise said. You said we should talk. She looked at him, her face calm, while inside she counted seconds. Each second was one more second Jude could hear. One more second to place her. One more second that Penny was waiting at home, watching the clock, counting how long 15 minutes had already become. Elise didn't know if Jude could hear clearly. She didn't know if the clues were enough. She didn't know whether she would walk out of this warehouse. But she knew one thing. She hadn't run. For the first time in her life, when danger came close, Elise Rowan didn't disappear. She sat here, on a cold metal chair in a warehouse that reeked of oil, facing the man who had killed the mother of the child she loved. And she didn't run, because someone was waiting for her to come home, and she had promised 15 minutes. The warehouse door opened. No glass breaking, no gunshots, no movie-style drama, only the soft rasp of iron hinges, and then outside light spilled in, gray and cold, carrying the smell of rain and the river. A figure stepped across the threshold, slow, each footfall steady and controlled, the walk of a man who doesn't need to run because he knows he's arrived on time. Jude Ashford. 2 of his men came behind him, broad-shouldered, blank-faced, hands in their coat pockets, but Jude walked first. This wasn't their business. This was between him and Carlton. Carlton rose from the wooden chair, unhurried, still comfortable, still wearing that thin smile, but his eyes changed. Not fear. Carlton Briggs didn't fear anyone in Portland. It was only recognition that the game had gained another player, and that player wasn't a pawn. Ashford. In person. Carlton's voice stayed light, drawn out just enough to let Jude know he wasn't surprised. I'm having a very pleasant conversation with Miss Rowan. Jude didn't look at Carlton first. He looked at Elise. She sat on the metal chair with her back straight, eyes on him, a small bruise on her left cheek where one of the men hadn't been gentle enough dragging her into the car. Hair mussed, shirt pulled slightly offline, but her eyes were bright, still here, still unbroken. Jude saw the bruise, and something shifted in his gaze, small and deep and dangerous, the kind of shift that makes people who can read Jude take a step back. Carlton couldn't read Jude. Then Jude turned to Carlton. You've gotten soft, Ashford, Carlton said, his smile widening, his arms opening as if greeting an old friend. A 6-year-old and an accountant. What did you trade to get here tonight? How many calls? How many favors? For what? Jude didn't answer at once. He stopped in the center of the warehouse, 4 steps from Carlton, close enough for a normal voice, far enough that no one needed to move, far enough that Carlton could still believe he was in control. You can have the south side, Jude said, his voice low and even, neither rushed nor slow. The money, the routes, the port, all of it. I'm out. Carlton blinked. The second time tonight someone had made him blink. But the child and this woman, Jude said, his eyes never leaving Carlton. No. Silence. The neon light flickered. The smell of oil hung thick in the air. Carlton tilted his head, measuring, calculating, trying to decide what game Jude was playing. You're bargaining with your empire, Carlton said, sounding amused. The amusement of a cat watching a mouse do something unexpected. For a child who isn't yours and a woman who isn't even yours. No, Jude said. I'm giving you one last chance. Carlton laughed, louder, easier. He thought Jude was posturing. He thought this was negotiation. He was wrong. One last chance. Carlton still smiled. Ashford, you're standing in my warehouse with 2 men, talking to me about last chances. You think 6 months, Jude cut in, his tone unchanged, never rising, only gaining a deeper layer beneath it. For 6 months I've been collecting evidence on your trafficking operation. Names of victims, financial transactions, shipping paths, internal police contacts, and Rita Cowell's role. Rita's name dropped into the warehouse like a stone into a well. Silence followed, deep and immediate. Carlton didn't smile anymore. Rita Cowell, Jude continued, the woman who runs a shelter for homeless children and sells their information to you. Names, ages, addresses, backgrounds. No family, no one asking questions. Easy to make disappear. Rita supplies and you use. She's the front door of your pipeline, and I have all the evidence to prove it. Carlton held still. The smile was gone completely. His eyes narrowed, mind running fast, flipping through every angle, every exit, every card he still had left. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice wasn't comfortable anymore. No, Jude said. It's already with the FBI. Not tomorrow morning. Right now. While we're standing here talking, federal agents are signing warrants. I'm not taking you down, Carlton. The system is. I'm just pressing the button. Silence. Long. The neon light buzzed and flickered. Outside, rain tapped on the warehouse roof. Carlton stared at Jude, and for the first time in a very long time, he faced an opponent he couldn't find a weakness in, not because Jude was stronger, but because Jude was no longer playing by the old rules. Jude hadn't come to bargain. He hadn't come to threaten. He hadn't come to start a war. He had come to end it. And Carlton Briggs, who controlled half the southern underworld of Portland, wasn't prepared for that. Jude turned to Elise and held out his hand. Elise rose from the metal chair, legs slightly numb from sitting too long, but her back straight and her eyes steady. She walked past Carlton without looking at him, took Jude's hand, and together they walked out of the warehouse into the rainy night. As the heavy warehouse doors swung shut behind them, Jude didn't look back. He had already triggered the silent alarm he'd set for the federal task force, ensuring that any immediate retaliation would be met with overwhelming force. Carlton, left stunned and overconfident in his fortress, retreated to his estate to plan his next move, unaware that his empire had already been dismantled from the inside. That night, Carlton Briggs was arrested at his home. He didn't resist. He opened the door when agents knocked, still wearing a suit, still wearing clean shoes, and he didn't say a word. Maybe he knew the moment Jude said one last chance, that it wasn't a threat. It was a notice. The next day, Rita Cowell was dragged into the light. Files, transactions, messages, calls. Everything sat neatly inside the case Jude had been building for 6 months, long before Penny sat in front of that laundromat, long before Elise ever stopped. Jude hadn't gathered evidence because of Penny. He'd gathered it because Carlton was a rival, because trafficking crossed the only line Jude had never crossed. Penny had only been the final reason he pressed the button sooner than planned. The pipeline collapsed. Carlton was jailed. Rita was prosecuted. The girls on the victim list were found, and Shay Dawson, even if it was late, was recorded as a victim, not a suicide. But Jude paid a price. Handing evidence to the FBI wasn't a one-way road. To prove Carlton's operation, Jude had to open a piece of his own. The transport transactions the police had never dug deep enough to see were now on a federal table. They didn't charge Jude. There wasn't enough direct evidence, but they knew, and once they knew, the empire began to shrink. Partners pulled out. Routes were watched. The South Side territory was gone, no longer to Carlton, but to emptiness. The black financial lines had to be cut. The protection network tightened. Jude lost nearly half of what he had built over 20 years, not in a single night, but in the weeks that followed, piece by piece falling away, like a wall having bricks removed one by one. He faced a choice. Rebuild. Take it back. Find new routes, new partners, return to the old game, or keep what he had now. The house with the white fence, the girl who drew the sun with yellow wax, the woman who looked a mafia boss in the eye and didn't blink, the drawing of 3 people holding hands, folded in a pocket near his chest. Jude Ashford, the man who built an empire from under a bridge, the man all of Portland knew and feared, chose less instead of more for the first time in his life. And he discovered something 20 years of building had never taught him. Less didn't always mean loss. Sometimes, less was the only way to make room for something that mattered more. The night after everything ended, Elise brought Penny back to the house with the white fence. It was still raining, but softer now, the kind of mist that didn't quite soak your coat but blurred the streetlights into halos. Penny sat in the back seat with the teddy bear pressed tight to her chest, eyes on the window, silent the whole drive. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't ask why Elise had been gone longer than 15 minutes. She didn't ask about the bruise on Elise's cheek. This 6-year-old had learned there were questions whose answers hurt more than not knowing. But when the car stopped in front of the house, when Elise opened the door, Penny stayed still for a moment, then looked up and asked only one thing. "Do you hurt?" Elise looked down at her. Those blue eyes held her, not with a child's worry, but with the worry of someone who has lost too much and knows she couldn't survive losing one more thing. Elise smiled, small and real. "Not anymore." Penny nodded, accepting it, then took Elise's hand, slid out of the car, and led her across the little rain-wet yard, through the white fence, up the steps, and into the house. Elise didn't lead Penny. Penny led Elise, into the kitchen. "I'm hungry," she said, simple and clear, as if food was the only thing that made sense right now, and maybe it was. Jude arrived half an hour later. He came in without knocking because it was his house, but he stepped lightly, as if he was afraid to break something. There was a scratch across the back of his right hand. Elise didn't know from when. He didn't explain. She didn't ask. He walked into the kitchen, looked around, saw Penny at the table, saw Elise standing in front of the refrigerator staring into it without taking anything out. And then he did something Elise didn't expect. He cooked, or more accurately, he tried to. Jude Ashford, a man whose meals were usually delivered by restaurants or made by private chefs, opened a can of soup, poured it into a pot, turned on the stove, and then stood there watching the pot with the kind of focus he usually reserved for million-dollar negotiations. He forgot to set the heat properly. The soup boiled over. He wiped the stove with a towel, and then realized he'd grabbed the bath towel. Penny sat at the table and watched the whole thing, and for the first time in days she smiled. Not a big smile, only the corners of her mouth lifting, her eyes brightening by a fraction, the smile of a child watching an adult do something foolish. And that tiny sound, so light it was almost silent, was the loudest thing inside the house tonight. They sat down at the table, 3 people, for the first time. A small table of pale wood with 4 chairs but only 3 used, 3 plates, 3 cups of water, 3 spoons, warmed canned soup, not good, a little too salty, but hot. Penny ate, Elise ate, Jude ate. No one talked much. The clink of spoons against plates, the sound of Penny slurping her soup a little too loudly, then looking up to see if she would be corrected, and when no one corrected her, she slurped again. The rain at the window, the wall clock ticking, a cheap clock that came with the house, steady and ordinary. Elise looked around the table. A blonde child slurping soup, a dark-haired man tearing bread with both hands, clumsy, like he had never sat down for dinner at a kitchen table. A small kitchen, yellow light, leftover warmth from the stove, and something settled inside Elise. Not happiness, not yet. Just the quiet after a storm, the kind of quiet where sediment sinks, the surface water clears, and you can finally see. She could see. She saw 3 plates, 3 cups, 3 chairs, and she knew, not with logic, but with her gut, with her bones, with the place that had been empty for 27 years and now was slowly filling. This was her table. This was their table. 3 seats. From that silent meal, Elise filed the adoption petition. The legal process was harder than she expected. Social workers looked at her file and she watched their eyes change. No family, no relatives, low income, a blank history. The kind of blank that looks suspicious. The kind anyone in the system recognizes instantly. An orphanage, raised inside it, never chosen. And now she wanted to choose someone else. They didn't say it out loud, but Elise read it in the way their pens paused longer, in the extra question, then another, in the way they looked at her longer than necessary. They doubted her, not because she was bad, but because she was someone the system had discarded, and now she was trying to take back what the system believed it owned. Jude helped, not with under-the-table money or threats, but with lawyers. The best lawyers legal money could buy. Lawyers who knew how to speak to a judge in the language a judge respects. Jude used what influence he still had, the legal part, the clean part, to push the file through administrative knots that ordinary people waited months to untangle. Not because he wanted control, but because he wanted the right thing to happen for the right person. And while the paperwork moved, Jude pulled back. Piece by piece. No speeches, no announcements, just quietly, like a man cleaning out a house. First, he cut the black financial lines he knew the FBI was watching. Cut them clean, closed accounts, erased traces. Then he narrowed the protection network, block by block, contract by contract, returning what he could to the people willing to take it. He kept the transport business, legal, licensed, taxed, audited. He kept real estate. He kept enough to live, to raise a child, to protect. He let the rest go. He didn't become a saint. He didn't wake up one morning as a different man. He was still Jude Ashford, still cold, still quiet, still carrying eyes people avoided. But he became a man who chose to live differently, chose less, chose enough instead of more. And with every piece he let go, the white fenced house felt a little lighter, a little cleaner, a little closer to the picture Penny had drawn in crayon. 3 people holding hands under a roof with sunlight. The day the papers were finalized, Elise didn't open the envelope alone. She waited until Penny came back from a walk with the sitter, waited until she came inside, waited until she sat on the sofa with the teddy bear in her arms, and then Elise knelt in front of her, eye level, the way she had knelt in front of Penny at the 24-hour diner weeks ago, lifetimes ago. "Penny," Elise said, "there's a paper that says I'm officially your mom, if you want." Penny looked at Elise for a long time. Those blue eyes were clear now, bright, no longer hollow the way they had been at first. Those eyes had cried and hurt and lost, but they had also smiled again, slept in a real bed, eaten until full, held a hand and not been dropped. "I want it," Penny said, then stopped and thought, her face turning serious, the seriousness of a child trying to hold something bigger than herself. "But I still remember my first mom." Elise took Penny's hand, small and warm, no longer icy like the first night, no longer shaking, no longer gripping from fear, but holding because she wanted closeness. "You're allowed to remember," Elise said. "Always. Remembering doesn't mean you forget someone new. Remembering means your heart is big enough for both." Penny watched her a little longer, then asked carefully, as if the wrong question might take away what she had just been offered. "Can I keep my first mom's name?" "Yes," Elise said. "Always yes." Penny hugged Elise, tight, the teddy bear pressed between them, stuffing flattened from being squeezed so many times, but still there, still held, the way everything that belonged to her first mother would still be held. Penny Dawson Rowan. 2 names, 2 mothers, one who loved her with her whole life, one who was loving her with her whole future. And inside a small house with a white fence, a maple tree in the yard turning its leaves, the smell of canned soup still lingering in the kitchen, a child gained a new name without losing the old, a new mother without erasing the first, a home without having to stop remembering the laundromat awning where her mother held her one last time, because a 6-year-old heart, it turned out, was big enough for all of it. Time passed, not quickly, but the way a river slows after rapids, the water still moving yet the surface flatter, gentler, and people begin to see the bottom. Penny went to school, a public elementary school 10 minutes away on foot. Elise walked her there every morning, hand in hand, the pink backpack on Penny's shoulders nearly half her size. On the first day, Penny stood at the gate gripping Elise's hand and didn't move. On the second day, she took one step, then turned back to look. On the third day, she walked in, turned back to wave, then ran. Every afternoon she brought home something. A page of wobbly handwriting, a watercolor picture, a tangled story about the desk mate's cat, a song she'd learned and sang with the wrong words but the right melody. She told Elise everything each evening on the sofa after dinner. Voice fast, eyes bright, hands moving with the story. She was learning to read, reading out loud with hesitation, her finger tracking each word on the page, stopping on the long ones, frowning, trying again, getting it wrong, trying again, getting it right, then looking up and smiling like she'd climbed a mountain. Elise cooked. Still not well. Rice a little too soft, vegetables a little too salty, eggs a little burnt at the edges. Penny ate everything without complaint, and only once did she look at the eggs and say lightly, "My first mom burned them a lot too." They looked at each other, then laughed, a short, soft laugh, but warm, the warmth of two people who have survived a long winter and realize they still know how to laugh. Jude came in the evenings. Not every night, but most. He came in a different car now, smaller and more ordinary, not the black-tinted kind of a boss anymore. He taught Penny chess. Penny called the night the crazy horse, and refused to call it anything else even after Jude corrected her 3 times. She took his bishop and shouted, "I got it," loud enough the neighbors could have heard. Jude let her win the first 2 games. The third one she won for real, and Elise wished she'd had a camera for his face in that moment. Surprise. Real surprise. The look of a man who had forgotten what losing felt like. Jude fixed a leaking faucet in the kitchen. He knelt under the sink with his head inside the cabinet, wrench in hand, brows pinched in concentration like he was disarming a bomb. Penny squatted beside him with her head tilted, watching, then said in the most solemn voice a 6-year-old could produce, "Dad, Jude is doing it wrong." He didn't correct her. He didn't say, "It's not Dad, it's Uncle." He only backed out, looked at the faucet still dripping, looked at Penny, and said, "Then you try." Penny crawled into the cabinet and turned the wrench the wrong way. Water sprayed. They both got soaked. Penny squealed. Jude pulled her out, and the two of them sat on the kitchen floor, dripping wet, looking at each other, and something existed between them that didn't need a name to be real. At night, after Penny fell asleep, Jude sat on the front porch drinking coffee with Elise. They didn't talk much. Sometimes the whole evening was only the sound of a cup set down on the wooden step, crickets, a light rain, but he was there, steady, quiet, no promises, no disappearance. That kind of presence, a presence that wasn't loud or demanding or announcing itself, was something neither Elise nor Jude had ever received from anyone. No one had ever stayed simply because they wanted to stay, not because they needed something, not because they would gain something, only because this was where they wanted to sit when the sky went dark. Then one afternoon, Elise came home early. She took Penny to school in the morning and the sitter picked her up in the afternoon. Elise usually got home at 5. Today she came home at 4. She opened the door. The house was quiet. She slipped off her shoes and walked in lightly, thinking Penny was napping. But Penny wasn't asleep. She was sitting on the floor of her bedroom alone, legs crossed, back slightly curved. In her hands was a photograph, creased, the corners curled inward, the edges yellowed. A picture of Shay, a young face, blonde hair, smiling, a natural smile, not posed, maybe taken in a park or on a street, sunlight slanting across her hair. Penny had hidden that photo in the pocket of her old coat, the oversized coat she'd worn at the laundromat, the coat Elise had put away in the closet but never thrown out because Penny wouldn't allow it. The photo had stayed inside that pocket through weeks and months, through rain and cold and everything, and Penny hadn't told anyone. She kept it the way you keep a secret, the way you keep a mother. Penny wasn't crying loudly. She just sat still and traced the face in the photo with her small finger, touching the woman's cheek and hair, gentle, as if pressing too hard might erase her. Her lips moved. She was talking to someone who wasn't here anymore, in a voice too small for Elise to fully catch, only a few words making it through. "I go to school now. I have friends. I miss you." Elise stood in the doorway and didn't speak. She didn't cough. She didn't make a sound. She only watched and felt her heart tighten under an invisible hand. Then she stepped in, softly, and sat down on the floor beside Penny. She didn't ask. She didn't talk. She only sat, shoulder touching shoulder, letting Penny know she was there without invading the private sky between a child and her mother. The silence stretched. Then Penny spoke in a voice so small she didn't look up, her eyes still on the photo. "Am I allowed to be happy?" Elise turned toward her. Penny kept staring down. "Why do you ask?" "I'm scared being happy means I forget her," Penny said, her voice trembling faintly as her fingers clutched the photo tighter. "I'm scared if I laugh too much, she'll be sad. If she's up there looking down and she sees me laughing when she isn't here, she'll be so sad." Elise drew in a long breath, deep and slow, using it to hold herself steady, to keep her voice even, to keep the tears where they belonged. Then she pulled Penny into her arms, gentle, and Penny didn't resist, her head resting against Elise's chest, Shay's photo still gripped in her hand. "Your mom wants you to be happy," Elise said, low and warm and sure, the kind of voice she wished someone had given her when she was 6. "That's why she told you to wait." She didn't say wait because she wanted you to be sad. She said wait because she believed someone would come. She believed you'd be okay. She believed you'd be loved. Elise paused and smoothed Penny's hair. "And you being happy is how you keep her alive inside you. Not with sadness, with happiness. Every time you smile, she smiles too. Every time you draw the sun, she sees light. Being happy doesn't mean you forget her. Being happy means you're living the life she wanted you to have." Penny cried. But this time it wasn't the tearing sobs, not the 3 a.m. panic, not the crying of a child ripped away from her mother. This time the tears were soft, sliding down her cheeks, dropping onto the photo, onto Elise's shirt. Tears of release, of acceptance, of a 6-year-old learning that loss and love can live together, that remembering and joy don't cancel each other out, that a heart isn't a room with space for only one person. Penny held Shay's photo in one hand and gripped Elise's shirt with the other. She held both. Without choosing, without letting go, she held on. Outside the bedroom door, footsteps stopped. Jude stood in the hallway holding a grocery bag. Coffee for Elise, milk for Penny, fresh bread. No one knew when he'd arrived, because he still moved that quietly, appearing without sound. He heard everything. Penny asking if she was allowed to be happy. Elise answering that her mother wanted her to be happy. The soft crying, the silence after the crying, the heavy silence that doesn't need more words. Jude didn't go in. He set the grocery bag down by the doorway, gently, then sat right there with his back against the hallway wall and his legs stretched out on the floor. His eyes closed. His hands rested on his thighs. His fingers didn't clench. They released. And on his face, for the first time in many years, something wet appeared. Not rain, not sweat, tears, sliding from the corners of closed eyes down his cheekbones, along his jaw, into the collar of his shirt. He didn't wipe them. He didn't turn away. He didn't hide. There was no one watching. Only him, and the wall, and the murmured voices inside the room, and the memory of a 7-year-old boy sitting on a step, who had never once heard the words, "You are allowed to be happy." Now, at 36, sitting outside the door of a child who wasn't his by blood but was his in every way that mattered, Jude Ashford heard the answer he'd waited his whole life to hear, and he cried, not from sorrow, but because at last someone had spoken the truth he needed. At 7, you are allowed to be happy. Allowed to be happy even after loss. Allowed to live even after being left behind. 1 year later, Portland in autumn. Maple leaves turned yellow, then orange, then red, then fell, spinning slowly in the mild wind like small hands waving goodbye before they touched the ground. The rain still came, because Portland always rains. But today's rain was different. A fine mist, thin and gentle. The kind that doesn't soak your coat, only softens the edges of everything, blurs the world into something lighter, as if you're looking through fogged glass. Elise took Penny for a walk. No plan, no destination, just walking. Hand in hand, Penny wore a new yellow coat, a small backpack on her back even though she wasn't going to school, because she liked carrying it. And inside were crayons, drawing paper, and a creased photograph with curled corners tucked into the front zipper pocket. Their feet led them east, down streets that felt familiar, then more familiar, until Elise realized they were heading toward the east side. She wasn't sure if she'd chosen it on purpose. Maybe her legs remembered before her mind caught up. Maybe there are places you have to return to, not to stay there, but to measure how far you've come. The abandoned laundromat was still closed. The metal shutter was still rusted. The awning was still old, rain still dripping from its edge onto the concrete step, in the same spot, making the same dark stain on cracked cement. Nothing had changed. The place was still itself, but the people standing in front of it were not. Penny stopped. She looked at the awning, the step, the metal door. She let go of Elise's hand, walked closer, and placed her small palm on the wall. A light touch, like touching someone's face, like a greeting. Silence held for a moment. The mist settled on her hair, on her hand, on the wall beneath her hand. "I used to sit here," Penny said, her voice gentle, not sad, not happy, just true. "I sat for 3 days. I held my bear. I waited for my mom. I thought this was my whole life." Elise stood behind her, silent, watching the little back inside the yellow coat, remembering that night, the night she walked past, the night she stopped without meaning to, the night she saw herself in the shape of a child under the rain. Penny turned around, looked at Elise, smiled, a light, clear smile, the smile of a child who has cried enough and now knows she can laugh without fearing that laughter means forgetting. "Then you came," Penny said, "and you asked who I was waiting for." Elise smiled. Her eyes stung, but she didn't cry. Not now. Now was for light, not shadow. "And then what?" Elise asked softly. Penny tilted her head, thought, then said, simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, "Then I didn't wait anymore." She turned back to the awning one last time. Her small hand brushed the wall, slow and gentle, then let go. "Goodbye," Penny whispered, not sad, only closing a door, closing the concrete step, closing 3 days of rain, closing a mother's name called into a wall that never answered, closing it so she could keep walking. She turned to Elise and held out her hand. Elise took it, and they went on, hand in hand, small steps and bigger steps on wet sidewalk, mist on their hair, yellow leaves falling near their feet, and Portland in autumn watched them like a story being written forward, not ending, only turning the page. Home, the house with the white fence. The maple in the corner of the yard was blazing red now, leaves scattered across the walkway, but someone had swept them neatly to the side. The door was open. Warm light spilled onto the porch, soft and golden, the kind of light you can see from far away and know there's someone waiting inside. The smell of coffee. He had learned to brew it because Elise liked a cup in the afternoon, and it took 3 weeks to make one that wasn't too bitter and wasn't too weak. Penny said Dad Jude's coffee smelled like dirt, but Elise finished every cup. Penny saw the open door, the warm light, and she let go of Elise's hand and ran. Ran across the yard, through the white fence, up the steps, into the house, and shouted, "Dad, Jude, I'm hungry." Her voice filled the small house, natural, unforced, unembarrassed, as if she'd been saying those words her whole life, as if the words didn't require practice or permission, only time long enough to take root. "Inside," Jude answered, his voice deep and warmer than before. Warmer than a year ago, warmer than 20 years ago. "There's bread. Wash your hands first." "I don't want bread. I want porridge. Porridge has to wait. I'm really good at waiting." And laughter, 2 different laughs, one low and one high, spilling through the small kitchen, out the cracked window, reaching the porch where Elise stood. She paused in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, looking in. The small kitchen, yellow light, warmth, the smell of coffee and toasted bread. A blonde child on a tall chair, legs swinging because her feet didn't reach the floor, telling a story with her hands. A dark-haired man by the stove, back turned, then turning to look toward the door, toward Elise. His eyes no longer cold, no longer distant. Not the eyes of a boss, of a man who built an empire, but the eyes of a man who was home. Elise had spent her whole life standing outside and looking in. Outside the foster home, looking toward the office where people decided where she would go. Outside the windows of adoptive houses, staring at lighted rooms and wondering if she belonged there. Outside diners, looking at families laughing at tables. Outside life, looking at lit houses, at homes with voices, at people who stayed. 27 years outside, 27 years watching, 27 years wondering what it would feel like to step in. Elise took a breath, let go of the doorframe, and stepped inside. Love doesn't begin with a grand promise. It begins in the moment someone chooses to stop, when the whole world keeps walking. In this life, maybe we can't change the past. We can't erase old wounds. We can't bring back what's gone. But we always have one choice. Stop or pass by. Stop for a child who is waiting. Stop so someone knows they aren't invisible. Stop, because sometimes one small question, "Who are you waiting for?" is enough to change a life. Penny's story, Elise's story, Jude's story, isn't only a story on a screen. Somewhere out there, a child is sitting and waiting. Someone is standing outside looking in, wondering if they deserve to step inside. Someone is hiding pain under power, wondering if they're allowed to love. If this story touched you, if you saw yourself in Penny, in Elise, or in Jude, please hit like to support stories told with a whole heart. Please share this video, because maybe the person who most needs to hear it is already on your friends list. And if you haven't subscribed, subscribe now to walk with us every day, where stories begin with something small but reach something deep. We want to hear you. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever been the one who passed by, or the one who stopped? In your life, who was the person who stopped for you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every line, and every comment you leave is fuel for us to keep telling the stories that deserve to be heard. Wishing everyone watching good health, a joyful life, peace in every day, and that you always find someone willing to stop for you. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.